All right. So I'm here with Elijah Ackerman of Rabbit Crest Farms, and he's gonna tell us a little bit about what's happening over there. All right. So the first question I'm gonna ask is where did the original rabbit cult come from? Where did it begin?
It started as just a really hobbyist endeavor in my kitchen. Always loved hot sauce. It's definitely been booming over the past 5 years or so. And where I live in upstate South Carolina, at the time, there was no sort of local specialty hot sauce maker. So, sort of as the idea grew and I started sharing it with friends, it went over really well. And I wanted to approach taking that to market, which is where I learned that sort of the growing of the ingredients was way more versatile and way more fun for me. So I sort of pivoted a bit. Instead of just doing hot sauce, wanted to focus on growing and farming to supply to other local like-minded people.
All right. So next question: do you have anybody working with you?
Yes, my wife is part of the company, as is her mother. I don't We don't really have any employees, and we'd like to keep it that way. Just sort of depends on growth.
Yeah, just
Um,
keep it central.
yeah, yeah. So I focus on the growing of vegetables and other edible produce, what they call a market garden. My wife focuses on the cut flowers to supply local florists. And then we do also have her mother, who is an in house florist, as well as our lawyer, and does a lot of the HR type stuff, the numbers and bookkeeping and things like that.
What did you do before all of this?
Before I got into farming, I worked in nonprofit animal rescue, working at a no-kill shelter here where I live. I managed the vaccine clinic, so I was a veterinary technician, more or less, and sort of supplying the local community with pet-related products, medications mainly. Um, and it was really good, and it sort of helped bring that over to the farming in some aspects because I grew up on an animal farm as a kid, and even though we're not going to be growing animal products, we are looking into partnering with a local nonprofit who does like farm animal sanctuaries. So at some point in the future, we will house rescued farm animals.
Okay, so do you want to explain how the hot sauce making process works?
For sure. There's a couple different routes you can go about it. The main two categories are fermented hot sauces and cooked hot sauces. I like to do both. I definitely focus on the cooked more because it's a little less time consuming and a little safer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah, I mean, mainly sourcing the right ingredients, of course, coming up with the recipe, just like any other food product you might make. The main components are always going to be peppers, vinegar, and then additional flavorings, aromatics. So in a DHEC certified kitchen where everything is up to standards, um, we cook everything down to 160 degrees Fahrenheit minimum, blending all the ingredients, and then depending on the sauce, it'll be aged for minimum 2 weeks to really let all the flavors meld together, and then it'll be bottled. And everything we do is by hand. It's all DHEC certified processes to keep it safe and clean, of course, but it is all manual, so it's very, very small batch. Like, I hand number every bottle because every time I make one, it's in uh, a relatively small quantity, so that it's always like a new product. I have my staples, I have my flagship products that'll always be available, but generally speaking, part of the niche of the market we're trying to hit is that every couple months it's going to be something new, something exciting, and there's a very good chance you might never be able to get that again. So it sort of has that exclusivity sort of wrapped in, which definitely helps with the marketability.
Yeah, very limited time options.
Hmm.
I can say they are well worth it. I have enjoyed my 2 bottles of Rabbit Cult Original and what is this? Last Harvest. Man,
Hmm.
that one's real spicy. Not
I
gonna
remember that
lie.
one's very hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the super hot. The hotter a pepper is, generally speaking, the later in the season it will start to fruit and ripen.
Oh,
I'm not really sure why that is, but because of that, as the season goes on, that's when you'll start to get your crazy hot peppers, which is sort of where that last harvest came from, because it was literally the very final harvest of the season of
oh,
all of the last peppers that I just mixed all together, sort of like for fun. And
that's.
yeah, it came out pretty well.
Do you remember what your first hot sauce recipe was? And like, where did you come up with it yourself, or did you find it somewhere online and make it that way?
Oh wow, that's it's hard to remember the very first one. I definitely I bought some literature online. Sources like YouTube in the modern world are very valid resources for learning and finding inspiration. So yeah, no, I definitely started there for some baselines, just for some inspiration. But it was really quick that I wanted to start sort of coming up with things on my own and changing it. Um, I don't remember the very first one. I do remember the first time I made a hot sauce that I thought, this is really good. This is something like unique or special. Just a Rabbit Cult original, we call it. And yeah, I think that was the first one where I made it and I felt good to put it out into the world, and it was really well received. And so that's kind of that was the one that told us, hey, let's take this to market. And it went really well. We sold out of our first real batch of 40 bottles in 2 days, and just kind of haven't stopped since. On a big scale, that's no big deal, for a lot of people, but for someone who maybe is thinking about turning just what was a hobby into going to market and quitting your day job, as I now have, that was kind of like a nice big green flag to keep going.
Oh, I'm glad you stuck with it. Everything.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Yeah. So back to you said you make cooked hot sauce and fermented.
Yes, we make fermented sauces as well, which, depending, are never heated up at all or cooked. You can ferment a lot of things, and it applies to hot sauce a lot more than I think people might think. When it comes to big name brand hot sauces, the the southern stereotypical hot sauce that's really heavy vinegar based, those are all fermented, like Tabasco, Texas Pete, Frank's Red Hot. Those are all fermented, which is a process where you lacto ferment the peppers, which eats up some of the sugar and creates an acidic flavor, which also brings the pH down. And once the pH gets low enough, other bacteria and stuff, the harmful ones, won't be able to grow. So it's completely safe. Getting the licensing for that is definitely a lot more complicated, but it changes state to state. My state, South Carolina, they are pretty uptight about it, which isn't, of course, a bad thing, because you got to keep people safe. The last thing you want is to hurt a customer or get sued.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but the flavor profile is definitely highly sought after. It can add a lot of interesting things and can meld the flavors together in very, very different, interesting ways. It is also, of course, a lot more time consuming, because for something to go through the process of lacto fermentation, it's going to require probably a minimum of 2 weeks for you to really get it on its way. And then, depending on the product, you can literally let it ferment for years. Tabasco, for example, those get barrel aged for a full year before it continues down the process. Most people don't let it go that long, um, depending on space, time, getting it to market. You can't wait a year to sell something unless you can think that far in advance. But it definitely is sought after by the specialty hot sauce community a lot more, and so for people like me who are trying to hit that market, it's definitely a good way to go about expanding your customer base, and it's just a lot of fun. Honestly, you can learn a lot about it. I mean, that right there led me to also making sauerkraut, which is lacto fermented. Um, you know, other products like that, making vinegars, tinctures, um, bitters for bartenders. It's its own kind of world, but there's a lot of really cool things you can do, and the marketability on them is really nice as well.
Do you have a favorite item that you make, or hot sauce, or vegetable you grow?
Yeah, I mean, definitely because of the hot sauce, I'm always gonna really love growing peppers. To me, they're like flowers because they're beautiful. They come in any color you can think of. Last year I grew ones that were white, so dark brown they looked black. Green, red, yellow, orange, purple, everywhere in between. So I really love growing peppers. I think I always will. And then making them into hot sauce. Yeah, I think my favorite hot sauce is probably it's kind of a homemade Tabasco that I do here. Um, and I'll let you in on a secret that we do in our house. I would not recommend anyone do this at home, but in our kitchen, in our fridge, we've had this little bottle that we add the last little bit of every hot sauce that we make into if there's not enough to fill like a final bottle, and we call it troughed sauce, like a pig trough, because it's got like at this point maybe 30, 40 different itty bitty amounts of hot sauce in it. So and we keep adding it with vinegar so it never goes bad. The bottle is probably about 3 years old at this point,
Oh.
and it just slowly and we love it. I would never sell it. I don't want it to get tested or anything. I don't know. Not very couth to say, but yeah, that's definitely a little like our in-house family secret.
What does that taste like? Just like a bunch of hot sauce?
Um, yeah, it does. It definitely changes over time, and it's got this really nice aged flavor to it. But like I did this smoked hot sauce a couple years ago, and I put in just a couple ounces or whatever, and it still comes through like to this day. Because every time we add it, we just shake it up vigorously. So it tastes like everything and nothing at the same time. I wish I could recreate it because I think that it would be beautiful and like, but I could never in a million years hope to recreate it, which I think is why it's so fun.
So, do you have a least favorite at all, or do you like everything basically the same?
No, I definitely have made things that I personally am not a fan of, but my partner will taste it and be like, "No, this is amazing. Like you need to make this." And turns out she was right. I think the one that comes to mind is I made this fermented ginger paste, which wasn't really a hot sauce so much as like a condiment. Think of kind of like ginger dressing, but a little sweeter, a little spicier. It's kind of like a mustard ginger with some Asian pear, some five spice, and some rice vinegar. And yeah, like I personally wouldn't ever really probably open a bottle of it, but it's done really well. So that's something that it's hard to make because there's a lot of ingredients and they're expensive, and it's fermented, takes a long time. Um, but yeah, it's like there's a really demand for it there, at least in my immediate peer group. So I have to make some of that every year.
Okay, what is your best selling item?
Yeah, definitely the Rabbit Cult original, just sort of the base sauce that we took to market. It's got a more accessible heat profile. It's more on the mild side, and it's simple, relatively speaking. So that it's super versatile, which is what I love about it. It doesn't really lean any one way. You can put it on pizza, you can put it on breakfast food, you can put it on tacos. So that's definitely the most popular one, and I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree with that. It is very
Yeah.
delicious. All right, so last question here. Okay, so you're going to, or at least based off my previous knowledge, you're going to expand into what you're calling Rabbit Crest Farms this summer, or
Yeah. So before, when we were just trying to be a hot sauce company, we grew only peppers to supply ourselves with peppers that are either hard to find or hard to find in bulk. After a year of doing that and testing out that market, we really enjoyed the growing process a lot more. So this year we expanded into growing way more than just peppers, and we are looking for an increase in acreage to do that on a true market farm viable scale, with the added bonus of starting to do cut flowers for an in-house florist and also other florists in the area. Um, Growing peppers is very niche, and if you're not making hot sauce with it, it's hard to sell that produce. It's a lot easier to sell other types of produce, and so we moved into that just to sort of broaden the market that we could appeal to. Microgreens, other summer vegetables like tomato, eggplant, zucchini, cucumber, as well as the winter vegetables. In our climate, it's going to be a while before we can move on to those, but root vegetables, salad greens, spinach, etc. And a more long-term goal would be, if once that's all stabilized, we would also like to move into what they call agro-tourism, where the farm itself becomes something of a destination, whether it be Airbnb or has a small venue where people can hold their own weddings or do farm-to-table dinners, that sort of thing. And instead of focusing on our own hot sauce products, we are partnering with a new local hot sauce company and becoming a supplier to them on the pepper end while we focus on these other endeavors. So we'll still be able to do some of our flagship sauces with help, which will be nice, but we're going to sort of pull back from the every few months releasing a super small batch niche hot sauce and focus on growing to sell to other makers and restaurants and direct to table and grocers in the area.
okay? Well, thank you, Eli, for coming to speak with me about your company. Like,
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.